Hello everyone. As you will see, I have changed my headphones, but that was a bit of a panic because my AirPods stopped working and then frantically realized that although I have about 50 pairs of headphones, as we all do these days, I couldn't find any. So, welcome back. Hope everyone had a good chat, good bite to eat, coffee, drink, whatever. We're heading into this afternoon session, and there he is, Dane Ralston of IoT, as if by magic appearing in front of us. It's just funny actually because I have a script of things to say and do, which I never ever pay attention to, as Stuart would tell you. And Dane and I have known each other for a little while now. And we had a great little chat there, and it was quite funny because I said, "Right, Dane, remind me what you're talking about." And he said, "I've no idea." Of course, he has every idea what he's talking about. So we'll try not to dance on this one, but Dane has even got a presentation. Folks, it's all about the data, and Dane is the person to talk to you now, and I'm going to leave him. And Dane, what we'll do is, after a while, with 15 minutes to go, we'll wrap up with some questions. All right, mate, over to you, Dane. Take care.
Cheers, Dave. Thank you very much, and thank you for putting on this. It's been a rather entertaining morning this morning. Obviously, we've had a few tech problems as well, but my camera is playing up. But yeah, as the reminder for everybody to come back on said, I have been working on this presentation just up until the last hour, and it's been a bit interesting because there were times where I really didn't have a clue what I would be talking about. Although the theme is obviously it's all about the data, but in the tradition of UnCon, is it really, is my question. So for those of you who don't know who iopt are, we are an asset monitoring company set up just 4.5-5 years ago to specialize in social housing. And we come from a background of asset monitoring, but it's been all sorts of different sectors we've worked in. And we currently monitor properties literally the length and breadth of the country, all the way up to Ullapool, up here in the north, down to Cornwall. And just a couple of weeks back, we were shortlisted for the Global IoT Awards in smart cities up against the likes of Thales. So it's quite humbling for a small company like ours to be up against those kind of guys, but in different sectors. But one thing we've known, or we've found out in the last sort of 4 years, is that we know that the condition of a home and the health of the tenant are inextricably linked. One is tied to the other. And if you tackle one, then you can very definitely say you're helping to tackle the other. And then other benefits will follow. So we basically stick sensors into tenants' homes, and the environmental sensors that measure the environment. And as I'm sure you'll all know, the environment has a really big impact on not only the health of the tenant, but the health of the asset as well, I guess. We transfer the data out into the cloud, where we then analyze it and generate reports and alerts that are helping both the asset manager and the tenant management team in housing associations and councils. We've been working, as I say, in asset management for quite a while now, and we've been using the data in lots of different sectors, starting off in automotive, actually working with Aston Martin to show that their cars, when they needed serviced, just coming up to general service times, but also if there were issues going wrong with it. And that's really what we do, is we look at relatively simple data and try and help improve the performance of an asset, make sure an asset is performing as well as it can be, and making sure that things aren't going to go wrong in an unplanned way. And whether that's a car or ATM machines we've worked in, and they're more simple, is there enough cash in the machine? Are people able to use it? Is it powered up? This one clearly isn't by the looks of things. And maybe somebody's taken a hammer to it, who knows? But it's all about protecting and looking after the asset. And we were working in the electricity distribution networks, when we first got approached about working in social housing. And as it says on the top of the slide, it's not always what you think of. Where are the benefits? We were working in electricity distribution initially to try and detect losses in the grid, which are valued at around about, well, 6 years ago, they were valued at about £4.5 billion worth of losses every year in the electricity distribution grids. And that's the problem is, you go into an area thinking you're using data for one thing, but actually you end up using it for another, because the electricity distribution companies don't actually really care about the losses. Unless it's a safety, health and safety thing, they don't really care because they get paid for them anyway. We all pay about an extra 10% on our electricity bills just to cover losses in the grid. Exactly the same happens in water supply chain, except the losses are even higher. They're closer to 50%. And so we ended up actually working in the electricity distribution, trying to help make the networks more efficient and help them to predict when their assets specifically were going to go offline. So, housing is no different, and the use of data in it is no different as well. Why do we question the use of data sometimes? We are all aware of Google Ads and how they track what you're doing, and nobody really questions that. It's a bit irritating sometimes to find a Google ad popping up on something you've just been looking at. You don't question the technology. You don't question the technology in your car telling you when your car needs service. So why would you do it in a house? Your cars can, these days, as I'm sure Stuart has told everybody on his Tesla, can track where he goes and tell him what speed limit he's broken and all sorts of different things like that. So, why wouldn't we do that in housing? And the point is, I guess, that housing is so far behind on using technology to maintain and predict and prevent problems that it's ridiculous. There's so many sectors out there that have used technology for decades to prevent this. And it's well proven at this stage that preventative maintenance is 5 to 6 times cheaper than reactive maintenance. So with the scale of the assets and the value of the assets that we're dealing with in housing, then we should be doing exactly the same. 5 to 6 times, is minor beer compared to some of the things that can go wrong, both in the electricity grids, but also in the housing as well, obviously. So I'm having my own little unconventional UnCon, because this is meant to be all about the data, and I know my section said that it was going to be IoT is king in COVID. Well, I reckon it's actually not about the data. It's about how it's used and the impact of it. It's not about the IoT technology. There's nothing new in the IoT technology, really. It's about, again, how it's used and the impact of it. Anything is feasible. When the SpaceX Falcon was launched, I guess it was about 6 months ago now, I can't really remember. My mind was absolutely blown by the fact that their systems engineering was being run in the space capsule on a browser in space, on a web browser in space. I just find that extraordinary. If you can do that, you can monitor social housing properties for the benefit of both the tenant and for the asset management team. So I think we need to stop talking about the technology and the data to a certain extent. We even need to stop talking about GDPR. They are all problems, or more accurately, opportunities, but none of them are insurmountable. Absolutely none of it is insurmountable. And to me, terminology to a large extent is the key as to how we move this forward, because the opportunities for using data in housing are massive, particularly from our point of view, particularly with IoT. The tenants are in. The tenants are not all needing to be convinced. We've done a few studies, biggest one last year, that showed that 80% of the tenants are happy for data to be used and produced, as long as they see the benefit for themselves as well. It's not just that they're just against it. They want to know that there's a benefit to themselves. And if there's a side benefit to the landlord, then of course that's a bonus to them. So as I say, it's all about the outcomes. To date, pretty much all the work, or most of the work we've been doing, has been on energy efficiency projects and preventative maintenance. But now we're getting far more towards a sort of beneficial, holistic outcomes for the whole team, if you like, who are managing housing properties, whether it's the maintenance team or the tenant management team. It's not a question of if it can be done. It's not a question of do the benefits exist. They do exist. They're fairly well proven now, and I think everybody understands that, even if you haven't seen systems up and running. But the biggest challenge and the most important thing is getting the right information to the right people and making sure that it is acted upon. Whether it's a fuel poverty play or whatever it is, it needs to be simple, it needs to be action driven, and it needs to be integrated into the systems. And when I was listening to James talk earlier on for MRI, I was really struck by actually, I was struggling with what to talk about, but when I'd sort of seen his presentation, I thought actually there's a lot of overlap here. And he was talking a lot about the outcomes and integration and making sure that APIs were available and all sorts of stuff like that as well. So it gave me a bit more confidence about what I was talking about. So who are these stakeholders? Well, obviously the tenants are very, very vital in the whole thing, whether they digitally include or digitally excluded. But IoT systems work across properties, whether or not the property is vacant or void, or a young or old tenant. It doesn't really matter. Obviously there's the housing provider stakeholders as well, so maintenance, management, digital inclusion teams, even with regards, we're talking smart cities or councils, down to the libraries. How do we use libraries and other sort of widely available utilities to help us spread the information that will educate everybody, but mainly tenants in this case, to help them help themselves and improve not only their lives but improve the property that they're living in. So many benefits. You can healthier tenants, better access to information, better engagement, and similar-ish on this side. You've got earlier interventions, you've got reduced cost, increased efficiency of their teams, and of course more time for tenants and better tenant engagement. But it's really all, again, a drive for action, for change, is what we should be pushing for. And this is really what it's all about. It's about accelerating the information, accelerating the intelligence to all sides of the equation. So even if it's just a simple condensation leaflet, how do we get that out to the tenant faster so that something actually happens, and they can deal with their poor ventilation, or they can increase their temperature a little bit faster than the months it might take, and we can get it down to seconds. So I wanted to sort of share a bit of a case study and a bit of a vision. This is a bit of a mix of both, actually, because this is a property that we worked on, but we worked on it literally in month 2 of the business being set up. So there was some stuff, there's quite a lot of stuff we didn't know back then. There's a lot of stuff we still don't know, but we have learned a lot. And as I mentioned, a lot of our projects start off as energy efficiency research type things. This property obviously has had external wall insulation and a bunch of different energy efficiency works done to it, and this one hasn't. And the aim of this project was to compare the before, compare the after, and then put into place the learnings from both and redo this building in a different style or different type of energy efficiency work, maybe different cladding, and trying to work on bridging a little bit, cold bridging and things like that a bit more. Anyway, so we monitored top left, top right, bottom left, bottom right in each building, and one of these buildings, actually, one of these properties became of particular interest, sort of after the fact, really, because as I said, we didn't really know what we were looking for to start with. And we got to know the tenant pretty well. His name wasn't Mark, but it's close enough. He was 32, he was a bartender. He'd recently lost his job and had recently moved into the flat, and was looking to keep his bills down as much as possible, as you would, and as a lot of people are going to be doing over this coming winter. There's going to be an awful lot of people in exactly the situation that Mark was in. So we saw the data coming out. We thought, okay, that's interesting. We didn't think anything was particularly extreme in this information that was coming out. CO2 levels were, as we know, quite high, but not too bad. But steadily high was interesting here. So they should be down around about the sort of 500 or 600 mark, something like that. Humidity in the bedroom was, well, actually across the whole property, was actually pretty high. Again, though, we didn't think anything was too bad in this. It should really be down around about 55 to 60. So you can see how the humidity levels are here are actually pretty high. And again, consistently high here. The real issue here, though, is the internal temperature of this property. Inside, the sort of average temperature here, as you can see, is around about 15 degrees centigrade. And that is a real issue. And systems now, our system now, will highlight this property as a problem property whenever it's got all the data coming through and the analytics looking at it. And this is the reality of what this property looked like. Just 9 months after we went in, it wasn't in particularly bad condition when we first went in, but when we went back 9 months later, this is what we came to. And interestingly, this property was in actually the one that had been renovated. So you can see the typical sort of things going on. You've got the damp around about the corners where there's a bit less air circulation or mold growth around there. Also, there's more likely to be thermal bridging around here. Clothes being dried in the radiator. Really bad conditions in the kitchen here. But the fan had been completely switched off, so that wasn't being used. And these are the conditions that we would now expect to see, seeing this kind of data, but we obviously want to and would now prevent that happening. So how does it happen with the integration? Well, it's quite simple, really. You've got our data, you've got the kind of demographic data within the housing management system. If you bring those two things together, you will highlight this property as being one of very high risk of abandonment, because fuel poverty will drive people to abandon. It's not just fuel poverty, it's general poverty. And two, of course, you've then got potentially really poor health outcomes, never mind the state that the property has ended up in. So this system will now drive action to inform the financial inclusion team, who can then help Mark and help him try and see how he can come out of that situation. And then also the energy officer, they could be deployed to help him maybe get onto a different tariff or look at using his energy system, his heating system a bit more efficiently, or whatever other aspects there are. And then, of course, you can give Mark access to the data himself, so he can see what's going on in his own property, and he can see, compared to the local area, how he's doing on that, and maybe send him an alert himself to say you need to turn the temperature up. So we would hope that this would be the outcome rather than this being the outcome from really poor conditions. So one of the biggest aspects of any stuff, as I'm sure I'm preaching to the converted here, is how do you engage for this kind of change? How do you get people to actually buy into this kind of change. We need to encourage more senior level people who are thinking on the long-term strategy and show them the benefits of using the technology, whether it's a housing management system, whether it's the kind of stuff that Drakov was looking at earlier, or looking at an IoT system. We need to engage better with the tenants to fully understand how their problems are and how that using tech can help not only them, but also help the housing management teams as well. And regulation will help to push these kind of things through, like the Fitness for Human Habitation Act. You can use this kind of information and data to help protect yourselves against this, but also you can use it to help improve your housing as well, so that these kind of claims made on the Fitness for Human Habitation Act aren't made in the first place. And of course, then there's the ISH2 standards that have just come out in Scotland as well, that all sorts of technology can be used to help monitor that and make sure that people are meeting their requirements there. Any presentation, I suppose, doesn't really miss on the COVID part now. And whilst my talk was meant to be potentially about COVID, I try not to do that, because all of these problems that we are tackling now using technology have all been there from the start. The biggest reason we got into this in the first place was because we, or our customers, didn't have the resources to gain access to their properties in the first place anyway, on a regular enough basis to be able to protect both the tenant and the asset. COVID and the restrictions under that, where you can't legally get into people's properties, has really just accelerated it. So it shouldn't be seen as a driver. It really is. It's an accelerator of using technology, and the work that DTL did with XM Reality and Kingdom Housing, using the augmented reality system, is a proof of that. It's a great system, but there's no reason why it couldn't have been and shouldn't have been being used before coronavirus. It's all about making your teams more efficient. So the problem has always been there. It's just a bit more under the lens now. So to my mind, we need to stop talking about technology as if it's sci-fi. It is here, it is now. We are, running spaceships on web browsers by the guys up there. Their lives depend on it. And yes, they can be expensive, but we're talking about very, very large scale and very, very expensive portfolios here. And the alternative can be far, far worse than that. So I'm sure anybody who's seen my presentation before, always a key point to get home is keep it simple to drive it forward. And there's no point in overcomplicating stuff. Yes, you can integrate, but the guys who are using it on a day-to-day basis do not necessarily need to know how it's integrating and things like that. Keep any projects relatively simple to start with. Engage with the tenants, we believe. Not all of our customers would agree with that, but we believe that we should engage with the tenants. Let them see the benefits of it too, of any project, and they will far more likely buy into it and engage with other tenants who are maybe a little bit more reticent. Plan ahead, because it's really very much about change management. It's really talking to how people, I saw in the chat earlier, people have been doing the same thing for years. Why would they want to change now? Well, because times are changing, resources are dwindling, funds are dwindling, people are generally less cash rich and will not be able to afford to pay higher rent to look after properties. So we need to work further ahead. and get everybody to change their habits, and their practices, whether it's the tenant or whether it's the housing management or maintenance team. So yeah, it's all about the outcomes. It's not about the data. It's not about the tech. It's not about IoT. It's all about the tenants, the teams, and the outcomes. Thank you. And I won't go into that.
Thanks, Dane. That was wonderful. And, the first thing I would mention there is that I just have to scribble out the title of the conference. And of course, it's not about data, stupid. So thanks for that, Dane.
Never make life easy for you.
I don't think anyone's going to disagree with you, though. I certainly don't disagree with you. In a way, it is about the data, but mainly it's not really. It's about people, and it's about change, as you mentioned at the end there. One thing that struck me before we go into the questions, Dane, we finished just a tiny bit early, which is good, because when we've seen those images of the mold, etc., it brings home a little bit of the real issues that we face in this sector. Sometimes as technologists, you lose sight of that. You're right at the front end now, or the front and the cutting edge of this stuff, where you will see the effects of poverty, and not just the provision of the housing, but the people that live in it, and the health effects and so on. So it's that was quite powerful, Dane, and thanks for showing us those images. One of the things that I would like to just mention as well before we go into the questions is, yes, I agree, it is more than the data that matters. One of the things that I picked up from your presentation there, which was really powerful, was the bit around, as I mentioned a second ago, change management. And I think that's where we all fit in. I think we understand. And to go back to your point about the technology's been there, sensor technology, and the way you can measure these things, and the way you can collect data and do things with the data, is all very clever, but it's not new. No, this stuff's been about for quite a long time. And in other sectors, it's so common knowledge now, or sort of it's common practice now, I should say. So I think the message that we need to try and get out as technologists and people and professionals in social housing is that, to back up your point, Dane, it's here and it's now, and no more excuses, right?
Yeah, and when we first started looking at this, we actually came across a project that happened 20 years ago that was very similar, and we contacted one of the guys who was involved in it, and it basically didn't take off because of the cost. So I mentioned that, in our thing, that it is pretty expensive. It's not a cheap thing to do, but the benefits are on the upside. But what we've always assumed is that the costs of these things are coming down. And just as an example, one of our most recent big project win with Renfrewshire Council, if we were to put our proposal into them now, it would be 10% cheaper, just based on one of the aspects of it that we've driven the cost of it. Just like that, in 9 months, the cost of it has come down by 10%. And that's one of the things we want to drive forward on all the time, is how to reduce the cost of it, because it's a scale play.
Yeah, absolutely. And with that scale comes the benefits that more will adopt it. So it's kind of that rolling juggernaut of the more we can do, the more we can convince, the cheaper it will become.
Yeah.
Let's jump into some questions, Dane.
Are we in the Q&A or chat?
Well, chat and Q&A, to be honest. But there was a couple of comments in chat which were quite good. But let's go into the Q&A first, and then we'll delve into the chat.
First I can't dance rumba.
I know. I can't. I've seen that. Can you dance rumba? I'm not doing it. Okay, here we go. I'm keen to understand what barriers need to be broken down to get house nogs to embrace IoT.
Yeah. Well, I suppose we've touched on it there, actually. Yeah. When you dancing rumba is moving up the scoreboard, one of them is cost. There's no doubt about that. When we see the ROI, we are seeing a return on investment within 2 years of the cost of it. So you would think, and you've used this term several times, Dave, before, as it should be a no-brainer, but it is a big upfront cost potentially. But the return on it is quite simple. I think it is. There's no doubt it is coming. We're just at the very early stages of it. The amount of interest we've had in the last 6 months outstrips the last 4 years by probably 10 to 1. And, you know, as I said in the thing, COVID has accelerated that, but there's no reason why it shouldn't have already been there. And then the other side is the integration side, really. You know, it's getting people to change their behaviors and how it works.
Well, one of the things the boards up and down the country and management teams up and down the country will be tasked with doing right now is reading the white paper. And the white paper will guide and direct. It won't solve everything at the end of the day, but what it will do is bring in discussion points, and there'll be more discussion around technology and things like this, making a difference to the tenants. And the tenants been able to question, and the tenants been able to say our safety, and this is all post-Grenfell, I know, but our safety comes first. So with safety comes health issues, with safety comes property maintenance and so on.
Yeah.
So I'm completely with you on that one. I'm just going to keep skipping by the dance rumba thing. You kind of mentioned a bit of this. Is it merely a cost? Well, you did talk about it. It's a cost issue and privacy concerns that's stopping adoption of IoT. Surely the data generated by IoT is of vast importance to HAs.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I would say is it's not stopping it. People are moving forward. We've got a lot of people interested in a lot of pilot projects. Just this week, we've had 2 pilot projects given the go-ahead.
Right.
And they vary in size from literally 8 properties up to 1,000 properties is one that's being looked at the minute. So it's not stopping it, but it is slow. Once we have more, I mean, we've had an ROI pretty good argument for the last 2.5 years probably. So it's getting that message out that the ROI on it is actually really good. So yeah, I mean, the data generated is of vast importance to the HAs, and it's not just for predictive maintenance or the tenant. And I think this is the thing that we struggle with. We will get contacted by a silo of an organization, and it's moving it beyond that conversation for their specific needs to the higher level. And that's why I say in the presentation is we need to be starting, the discussion needs to be starting at a higher level with people who have oversight of the whole organization. And that probably is the biggest blocker. It's moving from one level up to the next. If it's working the other way around, it's dead easy. So no real issues on that front.
Okay. Some of the other questions is, again, can you dance the rumba? We just assume it's a no. And well, you know, at the end, if we get through all of these,
I'm not going to evidence it.
Do you find you're always explaining what IoT is?
Yes.
Yeah, there you go.
Yes.
It's an easy one. Yeah.
But it's actually pretty easy. You know, once you show people the system and how it works, people get it straight off. Once you explain it, and that's why I try and stay away from talking about the tech side of it and the data side of it. Once you show people the benefits and very simple use cases, you know, we stick to sort of 4 or 5 simple use cases. And when you talk to people about that, then they sort of move on beyond IoT. And that's why I say the terminology is very important. You know, everybody understands what the smart thermostats at home are, so they all know, they understand what the switchy is of the world and things like that, and everybody understands, you know, how apps work and things like that. So
I think that's a good point. Once you get into this, you've actually got this stuff already right in front of your eyes in your house, whether it's a Ring doorbell, a thermostat. Maybe you call Alexa or Echo. There's devices of all sorts of things in your house that you're using to connect to different devices and to services. So yeah, it's just one of those things, and we'll get there more and more in generation after generation. We'll get there. Somebody's written, there must be issues on data collection and interpretation when you have hundreds and thousands of sensors.
Not really, to be honest.
I
mean, when we do a lot of work with some of the properly big tech companies globally. And, you know, some of the pricing we get through will give you an indication. They are talking about per billion messages.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, so the scale of the data we're looking at is really pretty minuscule. I mean, we take readings out once every 15 minutes. They're not big data packets, so it's not really too much of a problem on that front. Making sure, it was a bit of a theme earlier, that the data is clean and all that sort of stuff, and there aren't any spikes. You know, you do get the odd CO2 reading that goes to 65,000 parts per million, which is just not right.
Yeah.
But
you can spot that.
But you can spot that easily. And
Right.
So
okay. One jumped up there. It's all very exciting. It's dynamic as we go. The questions are changing. Are housing organisations equipped to deal with the increase in the amount of data that is generated from devices and from a network and storage and analysis perspective? Are these hidden costs of IoT?
That's a good question, to be honest, and I'm not sure I'm qualified to answer that.
I might be able to. I might be able to answer that a bit more, because I come at it from within the landlord and infrastructure and technicalities and so on. It depends, Dana, and maybe the question back to folk is, well, it depends if the data is stored in the cloud and what service you get and whether you want to store it in-house. I mean, I imagine, Dane, and this is something I've never delved into with you or anyone else, I assume most of this stuff is stored in data centers somewhere in the cloud, right? It's not something you store in a server in your own office.
Nope.
It's not like CCTV where you find the video is clogging up servers. So I would answer that saying I don't think it would be a problem. And I don't know if it might well though be a hidden cost, because people might look at the technology, the services, the type of work you guys do, and then they realize that this stuff has to get stored somewhere. But I imagine that's all part of the package.
It is, but the cost of that is coming down massively.
Right.
You know, as I mentioned earlier, you know, we're getting pricing per billion messages, and you know, and you're talking pounds for that kind of stuff. So it's not a big cost whenever you look into it.
I always thought it would be quite good to get you to say pounds, Dan.
Or tile.
It's those classic Northern Irish words, isn't it? Pounds. I can't do it. Sorry, mate. Oh my God, there's more questions coming in. We'll never get through these in 8 minutes. Do you think, is there a priority list, cost/benefit for IoT products, and what are the infrastructure platform costs? Again, you might be struggling on the infrastructure side, but
no,
the housing unit look like?
There is a priority list, but it completely depends on who approaches you. You know, so our project with Renfrewshire was all about maintenance, all about sort of energy efficiency type work. Project with Leeds City Council was all about tenant engagement. So, you know, it completely depends, and that's where you need to get to the higher levels to have it spread across the whole of the organisation. So there is, I mean, from our point of view, we see the biggest return on investment being with maintenance at the minute, because we can put the biggest number to that. But the team in Renfrewshire, for example, think that actually that the tenant management benefits will outstrip that in the long run, from what they understand of where their costs are. Where's that question gone?
It's at the top now. Is it a priority list? And I think what people are getting at is it possible to say, this is what housing does. Housing classifies everything into a property. So they'll say, what's the unit cost? What does this cost to have such a sensor, to have such a thing on mold and heating and whatever? How much does that cost? And can you buy it from a book? Because I think that's the next thing coming. People say, is there a catalogue list I can get that for 1,000 properties, this type of technology to monitor this costs £5 per property, or is it, if you get more, it costs less, and if it costs, you know, what I don't know, and I think what a lot of people in the sector will probably start asking after the white paper is, how do we section this up into costs? How do we value this? Because it's very much a landlord by landlord case. So,
I mean, the costs for the hardware itself, and we typically talk about a 2-bed property, because it seems that most of our properties that we monitor are 2 beds. So Typically, for 3 devices, 3 sensors in the property is about 250 quid, something like that.
Is that an annual cost, Dane?
No, that's for the hardware.
Right. Okay.
There is obviously the ongoing monitoring fee to monitor the property, generate the alerts, and send them out, and give access to the dashboard and things like that. So, and that is probably the one part we're working the hardest on at the minute. It isn't the ongoing monitoring fee, but the cost of the sensors. We don't see any reason why the sensors should be as expensive as that. We think that we could probably get to getting close to half that cost for those. There are ways you can mix and match the different types of sensors. So we typically use CO2 as much as we can, because it gives such great insight into what's going on in a home.
Right.
But you don't necessarily have to have CO2 sensor in all rooms. You could work it that way. You could, if you wanted to, just go for temperature and humidity as well. So, and then there's an infrastructure to actually getting the data out, but that really depends on the location, very much so.
Okay. Simon from Rubik's has asked, do you think IoT take-up is poor because it looks like an invitation to bring more work into departments who will tell you they are too busy already? How do we get past that? So it's the old fear of, I have to do more. Yeah,
that is definitely a barrier that we need to try and hop over. The whole aim of our system is to try and take the work away, really to give the teams, particularly in the housing management side, more capacity to actually deal directly with tenants. So we definitely see that as a barrier, but we're getting past it.
Yeah. I suppose what they don't want is to imagine a scenario where there's loads of monitors with loads of stats and data appearing in front of them, and they need to have a whole department staring at that all day.
Yeah.
I think that's a fear I've heard, but we know that's not the case, and once you present it to people, it's fine. Chris has asked, super insulating properties is going to potentially mean more condensation internally. We have to ensure we have good cause and effect analysis rather than trying to deal with single issues. Yeah, I think that's a more of a statement, isn't it? And I think it's a statement I would agree with, Dane.
It's absolutely bang on. I mean, we have monitored everything from your sort of houses built 100 years ago through to passive houses built in the last 10 years. And the passive houses have just as many issues, maybe not quite just as many issues, but for their age, they have just as many issues. And it comes down to the tenant lifestyle. That's where the vast majority of issues come from. It doesn't matter about the property, but then, ventilation systems like the AirX brick and things like that all have a big benefit to these things. Yeah,
I mean, a lot of the stuff we're seeing, like you mentioned, Switch at AirX and so on, and there's many others here today as well and tomorrow that we're seeing now producing the technology and the systems around it. But this is all good, because the next question is kind of from Gavin, who I know well, and Gavin is kind of supplementing what I said earlier here with the new House and White Paper. It's going to drive more people into thinking about these things, about putting tenants and the tenant voice first. The tenant voice saying, I'm fed up staying in a damp property, do something about it. And IoT to me is the way forward with that one.
We saw that actually. We haven't had too many direct engagements with tenants since our first sort of couple of years, where we were actually going in specifically to problem properties, if you like. And the one thing we really noticed, and I was really surprised at actually, was that once you showed the tenants the data, if it was a problem property, they didn't argue. They just said, okay, I understand. And that's, part of our real drive at the minute is more engagement with the tenant digitally, to try and help them understand why problems are happening, and then they can have more ownership over what's happening. They can actually make a big difference.
I skipped my question. I'll ask it another time about stakeholders. But Karen is a procurement expert, and she said, Karen lives in Edinburgh, just close to where I live actually. And glad you mentioned Renfrewshire. How did they procure your solution? Did they start with pilot, use, innovation, procedure, etc.? Because I mean, well, basically what you're saying is, curious to me, we'll kill the cat here. How did they go about that to let others know?
So they started their own pilot project about
Okay.
5 years ago, something like that. And then
Mm-hmm.
they went through a full procurement. They went through a
Mm-hmm.
full, I don't know what the proper technical term for it is, but they went through a full
Yeah.
procurement. It was interesting actually because it actually came out. Was it twice it came out, and then it got pulled back in because they were learning as they were going along, and they were sort of updating their tender as it went along. So,
Okay.
yeah, no, it was
Excellent. I suppose that's a question folk will also ask that and more is how do we get this stuff? You know, but there's ways. Karen, I'll catch up with you later on that one. And the last one, we're just about going to run a minute over. Chris McKenzie Grievous is asking, good point on boards execs understanding the power of IoT and digital. Representation of tech at board level are very poor. I totally agree. This will change as HEs adopt to the new digital world and the pressures of modern life now. So again, more of a statement, but I think, Dane, I think that's what we're talking about. That's where we're heading. Derek Steele appeared for a second there. Hi, Derek. Pleased to meet you. I thought he was going to do like, hi, Derek. I thought Derek was going to jump on like who's the guy that did it in the Brits, Jarvis Cocker on the Brits Awards, and kind of storms the stage.
Derek, can you do the rumba? He's gone. He's gone again.
What's he doing? Stop freaking me out, Derek. Yeah. Right, okay.
I think on that last one, I have nothing to add to that. I think that was absolutely bang on in the perfect way.
Yeah, me too. Right, brilliant then. Well, Dane, thank you very much. It's a small break,
always
folks.
A pleasure.
And we'll catch up and let's network again. Grab a coffee if you can, or a quick soft drink, and we will catch up soon. Cheers, guys.
Cheers.
Bye for now. Bye-bye.